Hello there, and welcome to this month's BFRB Club webinar. My name is Dr. Vladimir Miletic, and I'm the guy that does the webinars. In the next, let's say 45 minutes to an hour, because I'm not capable of restraining myself from all the digressing I do, we will be talking about BFRB trances, what they mean, why you have them, and also how to prevent them and how to stop them when they occur. This is a topic that was heavily requested by the BFRB club members. So here I am, like your fairy godmother, obliging. And just kidding. I'm always happy to do webinars on topics that you folks propose. So use the suggestion box whenever you can. So here's what we will be talking about. First, we will be defining what a trance is. I will show you a few examples from my clients, both from psychotherapy and my coaching clients, so that you can see what trances feel like. We'll talk about trances as dissociation, then trances as avoidance. I will give you a constructivist perspective on trances, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be me. We'll talk about why and how to get to know your trances. This may seem like a weird thing to ask of you to do, seeing how damaging they are to your hair or your skin and how psychologically detrimental they can be. But in my experience, the only way to deal with our psychological troubles is to face them head on, which means getting to know how they operate and why they operate, so that we can find healthier ways to achieve the same thing. And also because I think of all the troubles that we can end up with, the only unforgivable thing is if we don't learn anything. So even if you experience these very unpleasant situations, at least try to learn from them so that they occur less frequently in the future. And then in the end, we will briefly discuss some coping techniques. I will list them, and you have a lot of material on all of those in the BFRB club. And we'll talk about how to prevent trances as well. Let's start by defining what a trance is. Because a picking or a pulling trance is not a technical term, so you can't find it in a psychology textbook. It's more of a term that the community uses. It's a term that I've learned from my clients, and that unfortunately I think doesn't get a serious treatment in literature. So I'm going to talk about what trances are based on my clinical experience. I mean, Lord knows I have quite enough of it, but I would still like it if there was a more formal way to talk about them, but for now there isn't. So I started with the basics by defining the word trance, and I typed it into how do you call that search engine, Google. And here's what it says. As every serious scholar, I typed trance meaning, and here's what I got. It's a half-conscious state characterized by an absence of response to external stimuli, typically is induced by hypnosis or entered by a medium. If we exclude hypnosis and mediumship for now, defining a trance, a BFRB trance, as a half-conscious state characterized by an absence of responses to external stimuli feels pretty accurate to me, because it fits the experiences that I hear from my client, their descriptions. And the mediumship part kind of inspired me to use a bunch of artworks that were channeled, or painters who were in some way interested in automatic art or spiritualist art. The previous one, actually, this one by Hilma af Klint, is a channeled work. She was rather unknown until fairly recently. A couple of years ago, in 2018, I think, there was a huge retrospective of her work at the Guggenheim in New York. And I can't say that I'm the biggest fan of her works, but it was quite an interesting exhibition to visit, and especially because according to what you could see there and the dates when her paintings were made, she was quite possibly the very first abstract painter before Kandinsky and Mondrian and the whole gang, but she was really not very well known in her lifetime. She was a theosophist, It's this kind of 19th century esoteric movement started by this lady called Madame Blavatsky. And Hilma, the painter, believed that she was channeling images sent to her by some beings who live elsewhere. So I thought of her when I read the definition, and I thought, well, let me just spice this up visually so that at least if I'm talking into the abyss of the internet, I have something intriguing to look at. Anyways, back to BFRB trances. This is why I cannot finish a webinar in the time that I want, because I get distracted by all kinds of irrelevant things. I promise to be focused from now on. So it's a prolonged picking or pulling episode characterized by hyperfocus on the picking or pulling itself to the exclusion of external stimuli, in accordance with the definition from the Oxford Dictionary. So what we can add to this is that it's very difficult to stop with standard techniques, and that it's often followed by an altered sense of time. This is something that I hear from my clients quite frequently. An altered sense of time sounds a little strange, but what it actually means is that you could be picking or pulling for an hour and think only 5 minutes have passed. Because you're so hyper-focused on the act of picking or pulling or touching your skin or touching your hair, you completely lose track of time. That's kind of a side effect of the hyperfocus that I mentioned. And then there's a kind of absence of experience that I often hear described, meaning that when I ask people, so what were you thinking about during the trance state, or what were you feeling? I get the answer, nothing. And of course, when you look at it from a distance, it's easy to see that there is no such thing as feeling nothing for an hour and a half, or having no thoughts for an hour and a half. There is just kind of excluding those thoughts and those feelings, almost as if they were also external stimuli that are excluded. So a trance state is one of very, maybe not half conscious state, but certainly a very narrowed down consciousness. So hopefully you understand vaguely what I mean. If you're not sure if you've actually experienced something like this, I'm going to give you a few examples from my clients. Let's start with those examples. So this is the painting in the background is by a Czech artist called František Kupka. He had very interesting works. I quite like him, but I had to blur the painting, or however you call this, white filter over it, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to read the words. So here's what one client says. The whole world goes away, and there's nothing but this insatiable need to make my skin smooth. No bumps, no pimples, no scabs, no irregularities of any kind. And everything is magnified, and every piece of skin I peel off feels like a reward. So here we see that kind of hyper-focus and this exclusion of external stimuli when my client says the whole world goes away. Right? And there's only one mission, which is to make the skin smooth. And also notice that in the moment, it feels like a reward. I didn't write who the artist is, but I know who it is. It's Olja Ivanički, a Yugoslav/Serbian artist, I think. I had this on my hard drive. I can read her signature here, and I also kind of know her style. I don't know what the name of the painting is or what year is it from, so I couldn't put any additional info there. Here's another example. Sometimes I do it with my eyes closed, again, removing external stimuli, so that I only have one stimulus, hairs between my fingers. When the room is quiet and I can't see anything, the textures become amplified, and it's exciting AF. Don't need to explain what AF stands for, right? It's almost like sex. So this is a client who is in coaching with me, and we use different mindfulness techniques to help her pull her hair less. And the reason why, so I forgot to note, but all my clients gave me permission to use these quotes, and I'm also not using any additional information. To put this in a context, we're using mindfulness to help her reduce her pulling, and she's quite successful at it, except for these very, very stubborn and seemingly unpredictable trance-like states. This is kind of our last big obstacle. Here, what she describes is actually, her eyes closed. So she's kind of writing off one of her senses so that she can hyper-focus on the sensory stimulation, because this is what triggers her pulling. And she also describes it as sex, and describes everything as becoming terribly amplified. Of course, sex is not a BFRB trance, but there are some parallels that I honestly can completely understand, which is that all the sensations become somehow amplified. And what this client also describes, I just didn't put that part of the quote in, is this enormous relief afterwards. It's almost as if by spending so much time only focused on pulling, her entire body releases an enormous amount of energy. That is how she experiences it. Here's another one. It's hard to describe what it feels like. It's like mining on the moon. For some reason, I love this phrase. It's just so poetic. You carefully observe the surface, scouting for potential places to extract the ore. It's disgusting when I put it into words like that, but it's what it feels like. It's otherworldly, alien, beautiful in the moment, to be completely honest. It's so far away from everything that happens in my stressful, overly eventful life. Is that how people feel when they're gardening? So this is a very, other than this beautiful mining on the moon metaphor, this includes several features that I see very, very frequently. One is that in the moment, the trance-like state is not described as being a negative state of mind. Even pulling or picking doesn't hurt, no matter how much damage you do. In fact, it's often described as, you see here, it's compared to gardening. So something useful, and then something that is usually, for most people, a very calming experience. So this is the second time that we see a glimpse into how a trance state, aside from being so difficult to manage, also isn't necessarily a very bad state, right? And the extracting the ore thing is also very similar to releasing the energy that my other client described. And here you see something else, which is it's so far away from everything that happens in my stressful, overly eventful life. So this client otherwise leads a very stressful life, and somehow that trance-like state is the opposite of that stressful, eventful life. It's simple and it's calming. So I hope you're seeing here a common pattern, which is that there is some, as damaging and as difficult as it is, there is also something beneficial about trances. This is really important to keep in mind, and we will come back to this point, I believe, on the next slide. Here's another description. This is one that adds another, I think, layer of understanding for us. When my trance starts, I'm usually in the bathroom, so alone too. I go in and sit on the toilet and then accidentally lean forward, and then hair gets into my eyes. Again, accidentally, you understand, I have to move the hair out of my eyes, logically, and then it just so happens that one hair attracts my attention. I fiddle with it and feel like my world is sharpening somehow. I didn't even know it was blurry, but now it's sharp and small. All of a sudden, the hair between my fingers becomes almost everything. And that is so good. I want more. That wanting more lasts until at some point, I see a bunch of hairs on the floor. It always shocks me. It's gross, so I have to stop. I'm always sorry and not sorry, guilty but happy. So here, this quote contains so much material. I don't even know where to start. Let's start from the end, actually. So guilty but not happy is a nice way to summarize how many people feel. There's an enormous amount of guilt and shame after a picking or a pulling trance, because you see all the damage that you've done, and that's hardly a boost for your self-image, now is it? But then there's also this happy may not be really happy for everyone, but there's also some kind of loss of tension, feeling of release, or even accomplishment. And these two sometimes coexist in one person. Then if we go back one sentence, is this moment of snapping out of the trance, where my client here says, it always shocks me, it's gross, so I have to stop. And the previous quote, I believe, also included something similar, which is that it feels gross to talk about it from some distance. It feels gross, but when you're in it, in the experience, it doesn't feel gross at all. But that grossness is something that you can use as a way to snap out of the trance by kind of focusing on the damage intentionally, if it's possible in the moment. It's a good way to get out of it very quickly. It's a horrible feeling to amplify, but it is one that will end the trance. So let me just go back a little more in this quote, see what else. Again, we have this validation that the trance state feels good. And then the beginning, I think, is quite important here. So I put this in italics, this accidentally lean forward, and then accidentally again, and then logically this. The reason why is because no one says, I'm going to sit now, I'm going to go to the bathroom, sit and induce a pulling trance, right? However, when the client is describing this to me in therapy, it becomes, and I can say this for sure because I've discussed this with my client, even if it's maybe not obvious to you here, but all these little accidents are really features of the state. They're all moments to recognize that you're about to enter a trance-like state, meaning that while you're accidentally leaning forward and then accidentally hair gets into your eyes and then accidentally you have to remove it and so on, every one of these accidental moments repeat every time. And each of them is a moment where you can stop and say, I know where this is leading. Let me choose another path. Right? So it's not that a person consciously chooses to start a trance-like state, but it's also not accidental. One way to think about it is that your unconscious mind has its own agenda, it has its own agency, and it does what it needs to do. And what it needs in the moment is a trance, not because so much pulling is beneficial for you, but because it is beneficial in one way, and the cost-benefit analysis in the moment says, oh, screw the long term, let's just get some of this focus, some of this calm, some of this, as another client said, gardening experience, mining on the moon right now. It may sound like I'm defending those states, but I'm really not. What I'm trying to point out is that every psychological state, everything that we do, every choice that we make, consciously or unconsciously, even if you don't make a choice consciously, if you as this kind of totality of your psyche and your body made that choice, it's your choice to live with, right? So you kind of have to own it, even if you consciously didn't do it. But each one of these, as painful and hurtful as they are, really tell you that this is the best a part of you can do to get something really important. Our psyche is never random. There's always some logic behind what's happening, right? And we'll talk about this a little more when we talk about understanding the trances. But what's important here for you to see is that all these things seem accidental, and then a person just find themselves pulling for hours. But actually, there was a very set of steps that led to it. And there usually is. Sometimes it's hard to spot the pattern, but there's usually a pattern. Our psyche kind of operates by finding common themes and then using previous experiences to predict what will happen and act. So we are creatures that thrive on cognitive patterns. We're not random. Here's another one. My trances aren't that dramatic. Just the word makes it sound like I'm meant to receive visions. As a homage to this, Here's an illuminated manuscript on the left. It's a poem Tiger by William James from his Songs of Innocence and of Experience. James's art was frequently really just putting his visions onto paper. So when I saw the word visions, I thought, let me be pretentious and put some fancy art there. So going back to the quote, in reality, I just space out. My right hand goes over my left shoulder and starts scanning and then squeezing and scanning more and on and on. But really, my mind is blank. I just space out. I'm not there. So here is as my client says, a less dramatic description where they simply space out. So their hand just does the scanning and the picking, but their mind is blank. Okay, so hopefully by now you understand what this state is like. I would like to hear what your versions of trances are, because I shared a couple of descriptions here that I heard from my clients, those clients that were willing to let me share their experiences with you. But everyone's experience is really different, and there are many varieties of trances out there. So if you want to share your experience, you can use the contact page in the club. You don't even have to join to do that, and you can share your experience anonymously. And I will put them all in a blog post, just so that we have like a collection of these experiences for people who are just getting to know their BFRBs, just coming to terms. It could really be helpful if they could see similar or read about similar experiences so that they know that they're not alone. And because this is not a technical term, because this is not something that you can at least easily do research on, it's maybe a way for us to identify some common patterns and learn even more about trances. So don't hesitate to share your experiences. Now let's discuss why these trance states occur and what might be underneath it all, and what's beneficial about them. So the first thing to consider is that a trance state could be a form of dissociation. If you're prone to dissociating in your life in general, if this is a defense mechanism that you use very frequently, or if you have a dissociative disorder diagnosed, or you suspect you might, then this trance-like state could be a form of dissociation. It's not that for everyone. This is not what I'm claiming. For some people, it is. I've seen clients for whom this was exactly it, and clients for whom this wasn't it. So, but this is something that I see with relative frequency, and I thought it would be important to share. So when we talk about dissociation, what we're really talking about is a defense mechanism or a psychological process, if you will, that involves detaching from our thoughts, our memories, our feelings, our sense of self, because we're experiencing something that feels overwhelming and unbearable. It's a way to protect our psyche from something that we fear might otherwise destroy it, because we don't feel equipped to deal with it. Dissociation as such is an experience that, according to some estimates, up to 50% of the population has used at least once in their life. So as a defense mechanism, it's not all that rare. Most people, or at least half the people, have used it once or twice in their lives. It's one of those states that you can experience as just completely spacing out, as just being completely numb for a while, sometimes numb even to physical stimuli. Those moments when you're so overwhelmed by an intense emotion that you're not really sure if what's happening is real, or when you feel completely detached from your body, like floating above. I'm sorry, this is a slight digression, but not really. It's really important to not mistaken this dissociative detachment from mindfulness and from meditation. I don't know why, but in the past month or so, at least 3 people have asked me if meditation actually encourages dissociation. Not at all. Meditation is the opposite of dissociation. It's complete opposite. Meditation involves being with your feelings, no matter how intense they are, no matter how difficult they are, it means just observing them all. Meditation just means not clinging to them, not holding on to them. But dissociation, on the other hand, is meant to separate you so that you don't feel the experience. Meditation wants to throw you into the experience with a curious, inviting mindset, whereas dissociation wants to pull you away so that you don't see that the experience exists at all. So I said that dissociation is a common defense mechanism, yet the second line here says that it's often associated with traumatic experiences. So not everyone who dissociates has experienced trauma, but people who dissociate with some regularity, or people who have a dissociative disorder, usually have experienced traumatic events. Different studies that I've read give vastly different numbers, some even above 90%. But let's just, without kind of throwing random numbers around, let's just say that the vast number of people who dissociate regularly, for whom this is a go-to defense mechanism, or who have a dissociative disorder diagnosed, they have probably experienced some kind of a traumatic event. Because what trauma actually does is destroys our ability to make sense of what's happening to us. Right? It's something unfathomable, but literally unfathomable, something you cannot attribute any meaning to. So there are even some studies that show that when you're experiencing a trauma, your speech centers in the brain are suppressed, which means that your ability to tell the story of what's happening is limited. And when you don't have a narrative in your mind, you're very likely to be completely overwhelmed by intense experiences. And when you're so completely overwhelmed, you're experiencing huge amounts of anxiety, and you don't have that rational brain saying this will go away, or this is it, this is that, because that part of your brain has nothing to say about this, right? So there's no making sense of it. And then, especially when you're little, just completely detaching from the experience is a way to survive. It's protective. It's adaptive. It's the best you could have done in that moment. The trouble, of course, is that when we establish patterns, and these patterns we start using what worked yesterday, will be used again tomorrow in a similar situation, and it will be used until you find a better way to deal with that situation, or until you simply don't encounter these situations anymore. Unfortunately, for people who dissociate, this is a very handy, convenient defense mechanism. So it gets used for all kinds of situations. It's like a tool that can fix many different things. So once it starts becoming used at a young age, its use just persists because it is really useful. And then if you want to get rid of dissociation, it takes a very long time. It takes very patient, diligent work, kind of strengthening your capacities to stay with your feelings, at least for a couple of minutes, and so on. So I don't want to get into sort of how we treat trauma or what we do with dissociation, because that's off topic. But if you tend to dissociate, we have a whole blog on dissociation. If you go to the club page under blogs, there is a whole blog explaining different facets of dissociation and how they may, quote unquote, cooperate with your BFRB. So you can learn more about that there. But suffice it to say now that trances can be a form of dissociation. Trances can, on a slightly not on a slightly, but on a different level, they can be a form of avoidance. Avoidance as a defense mechanism really is just a continuous attempt, or at least a strong desire, to suppress unwanted internal experiences, such as feelings, thoughts, memories, or body sensations. So you don't necessarily wait for them to arise, and then dissociate. Instead, you arrange things, act or don't act, as the case may be, in a way that you avoid from ever having to have them come up in your experience. Right? So you resolve the problem of not tolerating anxiety, for example, by avoiding every conflicting situation. If you're afraid of rejection, then you might be familiar with this pattern. then you will avoid every argument, every possibility of conflict. So in that way, you don't have to experience it, you don't have to dissociate from it, you simply avoid every instance in which it can occur. So as Paul Václavic, a famous Austrian, Italian, American psychiatrist, would say, he was also a constructivist, avoidance is actually a solution. If the problem is tolerating anxiety and you avoid everything anxiety-inducing, you have solved your anxiety problem, right? However, that avoidance then becomes a problem on another level. If your method of avoidance is picking or pulling, then to avoid having to process certain internal experiences, you might resort to picking or to pulling, which then creates a problem on its own. Then there's shame around that. Then there's the damage, the physical damage it does, right? There's the fact that it becomes, that it basically obtains a life of its own, and then you can't really, as people would annoyingly say, just stop. So some signs outside of trances that you may be employing avoidant mechanisms is that you avoid situations that make you uncomfortable. In fact, if you use the word uncomfortable to describe all your feelings, I would say that that in itself, while not being obviously 100% certain indication of avoidance, is a really good sign, because it indicates that you can't quite differentiate between your emotions, which means that you're avoiding to look at them. To me, one of the most, well, if you're my client listening to this, really don't censor yourself in any way. But as a therapist, one of the most annoying things that I can hear is when I ask someone, how did you feel in that situation? And they say, I felt uncomfortable. That's about as saying I felt something that was not really pleasant, but could be anything else. So it's not a very informative way. And then when this is the best you can say, it's because you tried to avoid the experience, or simply also because you never developed the vocabulary to describe these experiences, right? And then all your emotions kind of merge into one. Social withdrawal can also be a sign of avoidance, because that way you avoid conflict. People pleasing can be a sign of avoidance, because if everyone likes you, then no one wants to leave you. Let's say if you want to avoid rejection, or if you want to avoid conflict as well. Trying not to think distressing thoughts. It's when people talk about distracting themselves. I have clients who say they choose to work 6 days a week because they're trying to distract themselves from anxiety, for example, or from worrying about something else. And while in the short term, this may be a valuable strategy, in the long term, it's really everything but. If you look at BFRB trances as acts of kind of radical experiential avoidance, then to understand them, we need to examine what's not there rather than what is. I hope this makes sense, because if a trance is a way to avoid something that you cannot avoid in any other way, so hence the word radical here in the on the slide, then we can't really understand why you go into a trance by examining what's happening in the trance itself. Instead, you have to look at your life and your experiences around it, because what's causing it is not there. It's meant to not be there. That's why the state is pleasant to begin with, because it allows you to block out those things that you don't know how to deal with. Here's an example of how you can go about doing that. So it's about kind of widening the scope. This is I've used this example over the years many times, so I apologize if you've been to any of my workshops, or have taken courses with me, or if you listened to me talk about trances before. I use this example all the time because it's quite good, I think. It was a client who experienced a trance, and then we, instead of analyzing the trance, analyzed and traced the whole day before it. And so here's what happened. The trance is marked here in red, and the emotions that went unrecognized and unprocessed are marked here in blue. So basically, this was a client who went through their entire day without stopping to see what they feel, without processing their feelings, and without kind of working to better their state of mind. So there was a lot of little avoidance that then led to a lot of avoidance. So here's the example. Yesterday, I had an argument with my boss. So my client was angry. And then when I got home, I screwed up the dinner, disappointed, because I was half asleep, exhaustion, and had to order takeout. So disappointment again, because no cooking dinner, bad parent, therefore disappointment. Great, more unhealthy food, for the kids, so guilt as well. And what kind of a parent gives their kids crappy food, right? My youngest is sick, so there's a sense of obligation there for a parent and also fear. So he's extra difficult and cranky, and then there's a bit of powerlessness there. So I didn't make these up. We talked about, so basically I let my client tell me the story, and then we broke it down and analyzed it from the distance. There was a little bit of powerlessness because when you have a cranky child, you tend to feel powerless because there's nothing you can do to make them feel, good again. And as a parent, you usually feel like that's your obligation when they're little. In the end, I went to the bathroom. So this was a choice. This is where my client had conscious agency and picked for over an hour. That's where the trance state came in. But as you can see, it didn't really come out of nowhere. So initially, if you would digest this story, it was like I went to work, my kid's sick, I went into the bathroom and picked for over an hour. But really, there was anger, disappointment, exhaustion, guilt, obligation, fear, powerlessness. All of these things were a part of my client's emotional experience that day. All of this went unprocessed, and all of this was stored in my client's body. Can you imagine the level of bodily excitement, and not in a good way, just kind of excitation that was present? And then my client goes into the bathroom, picks for over an hour, oblivious to the world, as the description says here. It was like I went on vacation, so experiencing relief and calm, but now I feel horrible. What's wrong with me? So after that little vacation, my client jumps right back into negative emotions. And this is actually a cycle that you can see with BFRBs in general, that the guilt and the self-judgments that come after picking or pulling will then just create more tension, more anxiety, more negative self-image, and therefore in the long run generate even more picking or more pulling. But here you would have a person who would come to you and say, well, I just went into a trance and it was really horrible. But actually, this trance was a result of truly unbearable state of mind, layering of all these different negative emotions throughout the day. If this happens in therapy quite frequently, then my clients will say, well, I slept for 2 hours, then I took care of my kids, then I went to work and I worked for 12 hours, and then I picked up the kids from school, and then I went home, and then I made dinner, and then I played with the kids, and then I put them to sleep, and then I continued to work. I really don't understand why I'm so stressed, right? This is one of those situations. When you go through your day and do not pay attention at all to what you're feeling, then a trance can come out as a surprise, as a shock even. Whereas if you look at it like this, it's actually a very logical progression. It would be strange that these negative emotions didn't go out in some way. So here's a constructivist perspective on trances, my favorite one. So personal construct theory is my starting point here. If you want to learn more about it, on 4 Steps Coaching's YouTube channel, I'm posting some of the lectures that I gave. I'm recording them again on personal construct psychology. It's meant for people who know next to nothing about psychology, so I'm trying to kind of explain it in a way that's not very technical or demanding, because as a psychological system, it is very technical, and then it puts people off from learning it, and it's quite beautiful. Anyway, the fundamental metaphor in constructivism is that every person is a kind of a scientist. So everything you do is testing some kind of an assumption about yourself or the world. Every action, every word, every choice is some kind of an experiment. You're testing something. And in constructivism, we can take this metaphor and then use it to understand trances a little bit better. The reason why I'm offering a constructivist perspective, all jokes aside that I wouldn't be me if I didn't use constructivism, is because it will give you a way of thinking that you can apply to yourself and come up with an idea of what a trance is to you. Whereas writing it off as dissociation or as avoidance could be useful for some people, but it certainly does not extend to everyone. So here's a way that these are maybe paths or entry points so that you can think about your experiences to come up with your own theory as to why you do this. One is to limit your psychological space, basically to streamline your bandwidth. So when you see the previous example, here a trance was just a way to narrow down the world because there was just too much, right? The second way to look at it is if you're testing a hypothesis, so you're trying to achieve something specific. I will go through all of these and give you examples. And then you can see a trance as a choice. And this may be a little radical since it's not a conscious choice, but unconsciously we make choices as well. So limiting psychological space. Let's consider this one first. On the side note, I've never been here, but I would really like to. This is Ellsworth Kelly's chapel, kind of like Rothko's chapel, only Ellsworth Kelly's chapel in Austin, Texas. It's his final work. It was finished, I believe, after he died. It's really, really sublime. Anyway, back to limiting psychological space. He was a minimalist painter, hence the choice of artwork here. The totality of what we're aware of is what we call the field in constructivism. So everything that your senses are telling you, every thought you have, every memory, so literally everything that you're aware of is called the field of awareness. That should be simple enough, right? Everything within that field, we have to make sense of or to construe in some way. Otherwise, if you don't have constructs for something, you have anxiety as a result. So you want to classify things, to put them in certain boxes, right? Because when you have an event in box A, you know how to behave because the box itself has instructions on it. That's what constructs are. They're just ways of classifying things that we encounter so that we know what to do in response, what to think, how to feel, how to judge events. When our constructs don't lead to appropriate action, we become anxious. So that's what I said when I said no constructs equals anxiety. When there's too much anxiety, we become overwhelmed. When your field contains too much, more than you can handle, we become very confused, very anxious. And then sometimes, in order to reduce this confusion and this overwhelm, we reduce our field. It's called constriction. Expanding the field is called dilation, and this is called constriction. So we constrict our field. A picking or a pulling trance is an example of constriction at its finest. You literally erase parts of the world and bring your world down to what you know will work. So you say, maybe I cannot handle my work stress. Maybe I cannot handle my kids. Maybe I cannot handle my husband. Maybe I cannot handle, I don't know, the politics, the world. But what I can do is close the bathroom door and spend 2 hours doing what is absolutely under my control. Because picking itself involves certain constructs that tend to work. If you're looking to alleviate anxiety, picking or pulling will do that. If you're looking to make your skin smoother, we all know that eventually, and in the long run, this is no solution, but in the moment, feels like it's working. If you're very, let's say, sensitive to sensory stimulation, scanning your skin may be a very satisfactory experience. You can feel like you're achieving something. It means that some constructs are being validated. And so when the world becomes too much for you, then a trance is a way to get rid of all those aspects of the world that don't work, that you can't make sense of, that you don't know what to do with. And then trances kind of restore your functionality. While they last, in those moments, your world is functional again, right? And let me show you visually how that operates. On the left, you have a very minimalist structure called Ángulo Rojo, the red angle, right? From Carmen Herrera. She recently passed away. She was over 100 years old. She's a minimalist painter, originally from Cuba, but she lived in New York. She's a really wonderful painter if you like minimalism. And then on the right, you have one of the abstract paintings of Gerhard Richter, who is one of the great living painters today. Take a look at these. So Richter's career is not just abstract painting. He's done literally everything. He's, for a reason, one of the great painters of our time. From photorealism to abstract paintings, Richter can do anything. So just take a look at these two. Maximize the screen, just move backwards, and just tell me, what's easier to make sense of? Not what is it that you like more, not what appeals to your sense of aesthetics, but what is what is easier to explain, to understand. The simple red angle on the left, or the mess of colors and shapes on the right? I believe the answer is kind of obvious, which is that you may not like minimalist sculpture, but the one on the left is far easier for eyes to digest. And that's exactly why constriction works so well, because it makes the world simple. It makes it very easy to deal with. If you don't have 55 problems, but just one, your skin not being smooth, then you know what your mission is. You know what you're supposed to do. Okay? On the other hand, if you have 55 problems, like you have hundreds of shapes, colors, shades, variants here on the right, then where on earth do you start? Which is why in extreme situations, when things stop making sense, we go towards constriction. We simplify the world for ourselves. Another way to look at it is as testing a hypothesis. So in personal construct psychology, we always start with the same question. What is the hypothesis that my client is currently testing? If they're late for sessions, what are they testing? If they cancel the session the day before, and it's not because something came up, what are they testing? If a client uses a certain gesture all the time, what is that gesture communicating? Right? So this doesn't have one answer. Everyone's lived experience is different. So the hypotheses that you will exist here in front of me are really different than some other you listening to this. The way that we make sense of the world is not, there's no objective set of constructs that we all have. We have constructs that most of us share because we grew up perhaps in similar cultures. So there's some basic repertoire of constructs, but everyone's path in life shapes their constructs. So your existing constructs will make choices for you. Those choices will bring you new experiences. New experiences will shape your constructs and so on. So there's no one universal answer as to what is it that you're trying to achieve with your picking or your pulling. But here's just some. I'm beautiful only if I have clear skin. I need to be beautiful now. Therefore, a trance is the next logical thing to do. If I don't pull, I will suffocate from anxiety. Therefore, I'm terribly anxious. I must pull. There's no other choice. No gray hair, no old age. This is a very frequent association. And then when people only pull their gray hairs, it's a sometimes in some cases, it's kind of a way to try and undo aging, to be who you are. Because even if you dye your hair, you have kind of altered your self-image. But if you pull every gray hair, you can continue to think of yourself in similar terms. So you don't really have to change anything, at least temporarily. So there are many ways that you can look at this, and this is something that we do in therapy and try to figure out. And it's something that can serve as a point of reflection for you, as something to journal about, to try and figure out as you go along. And then you can see it as a choice. The question mark here next to the painting is just that I don't know what age when it was painted. This is only a fragment of a larger painting. So we always choose based on a construct, right? As I said, we classify things, we put them into boxes so that we know what to do with them. A construct is usually bipolar. And when I say usually, I mean always. It's X or Y. That's how our psyche thinks. We establish two extremes, and then we position things somewhere along that spectrum. To learn why a BFRB trans is desirable, like why is that a choice that your mind makes, even if it does so unconsciously, we have to know what's the other option, right? Because it's not this is the best, it's usually this is better than. If I have to choose between X and Y, then I choose one because it's better than the other. So for example, you can find yourself between a choice. I will either pull my hair or continue to suffer in silence. This is specifically from a client of mine, from an adolescent client of mine. And for her pulling was a way to communicate to her family that there's something happening to her that she needs to be attended to emotionally. This client was a middle child, and the youngest child in the family had severe and really serious chronic health issues, and all the attention was there on that child, and with a good reason. I mean, the child's life was endangered, and my client would complain about feeling anxious or depressed, but all of that was really not taken seriously because it's not brain surgery, because it's not radiation, because it's not life-threatening, at least on the surface. But then hair pulling and bald patches are awfully like when your hair starts falling out after cancer treatments. It's something that ought to communicate seriousness, like, hey, pay attention here. Maybe I don't have this rare form of cancer, but I have serious problems. So for this client, hair pulling, specifically trances, where she would create bald spots, were meant to be a way of communicating. And that choice was not the best choice. It was not a good choice. It was not a healthy choice. It was not a conscious choice either. It became conscious as we worked together in therapy. But it was a way to let the family know, based on what was visible to the client that attracts their attention, which is hair falling off when someone is undergoing cancer treatment. And here was my client saying, look, I have no hair too. I suffer. I'm experiencing something really difficult. And then when you're not taken seriously, you go and you pull more, because that, again, sends out the same message. And it also provides some relief from feeling rejected by your parents. And this is, of course, a very complex family situation, and I'm not blaming the parents. I'm just kind of explaining what choices my client was seeing. I will fall apart if I don't pull. Here, the function would be keeping it together. Better for my skin to be sore than to be constantly stressed. Here, the function is to self-soothe. So it's not, love my skin picking. This is the only resource I have to self-soothe. So I will either self-soothe or I will be constantly stressed. So I choose to self-soothe. Again, may not be even a conscious choice, but it's something that you bring awareness into when you start changing. Pulling is better than death. Life with this much sadness isn't worth living. Here, the function is vital. These are all statements from my clients. These are all their insights. Pulling is better than death. I'm so sad, And pulling is the only way I have, pulling trances specifically, to at least for a short period of time, get away from all that sadness. Because pulling trances are calming. They're like gardening on the moon, right? If you remember that quote. No, mining on the moon, sorry. So that's how I continue to live. So is it a shitty choice to have? Absolutely. But is it the less horrible option? Absolutely. And so what we do here in therapy or coaching or any other kind of personal development process is to reframe the choices, to reconstrue your possibilities. So none of these categories are set in stone. No one's condemned to function with this forever. Just please keep that in mind. This on the right, I have one more remark on the art, and then I promise I'll shut up about it. So this is Trances Dyson's work called South. It is just so beautiful. Just so beautiful. Check her out. She's an amazing artist. One of the best abstract artists working today that I know of. Anyway, in the beginning, I was talking about getting to know your trances. And I would hope that these few examples that I gave here are good enough reasons why you should get to know your trances. These hypotheses, these choices that my clients face, tell you why trance states are sometimes really useful and even protective. They're absolutely something that you want to do away with, right? But in order to change what leads to them, you have to get to know why they arise in the first place. And as you can see, sometimes it's obvious and simple. Sometimes it's really very difficult and complex. And there's a lot of psychological digging, archaeological work to be done. Here are some very superficial questions to get you started. If you like journaling, if you like just reflect and be introspective, here's where you can start. Are your trances sudden or gradual? Does it start like pulling, but then you lose control, conscious pulling, but then you lose control at some point? Or are you out of control right from the start? Are the triggers internal or external? Meaning when I say internal, I mean, are you triggered by memories, thoughts, or feelings? Or are you triggered by something external, something someone else does to you? Are your trances related to dissociation? Are they, let's say, radical avoidance? If not, how do you see the choices that you have before you start picking or pulling? Is it to kind of reduce the world to a more manageable size? Where are you when your trances happen? This is frequently a practically useful information. As you can see, there are several examples that I gave you that all involve bathrooms. So then to prevent a trance, you have to kind of reframe how you use bathrooms. Who's close to you at the time? What are some warning signs? This is why I like journaling so much. If you journal and then review your journals, from the VIP lounge, you can download like a very simple journal that you can use. Or just get a notebook and write stuff down. But when you revisit your journals every couple of weeks, you can find some warning signs and risk factors, and then alter them, react to them, work with them in a timely manner. What are the emotions you are having a hard time coping with or understanding? And then maybe avoiding those emotions leads to a trance-like state for you. These are places where we start. We don't just jump in like these, I will either pull my hair or suffer in silence. This is not something you get to after 5 minutes of analysis. I'm sure that intellectually, a lot of you can figure out many reasons and pack them neatly with a bow, but it doesn't mean that experientially they're actually what happens. Just because something is formally logical on the surface doesn't mean that it's logical for you, for your unconscious mind. So you have to start with these very general basic observations, and then slowly piece together a theory. If you're in treatment with someone, then this is what you do with your therapist. If you're on a self-help journey, then this is what you do alone. This is why we have our accountability prompts, our prompts in the BFRB club, is because every week I ask you to reflect on an aspect of your experiences so that slowly you raise your awareness and so that you get to know your BFRB from different angles. And then over time, even spontaneously, you can come up with better strategies. So here's how to get to know them if you want more structure. 1, find a therapist, do some journaling, join the BFRB club. But do not skip getting to know your trances. It's also useful to have an accountability partner. That can be a coach, it can be a partner, it can be a friend, it can be someone who's on the similar journey with you. Our club serves that purpose exactly, so that you can come every Friday, respond to these prompts, see what other people are sharing, exchange experiences, learn from each other. It's very useful to have this outside perspective on yourself, because we always have blind spots. We never, no matter how introspective you are or you think that you are, and this obviously includes me as well, because I'm just human like everyone else, we always have blind spots, always. So this is why therapists have therapists, because we can't see everything on our own. How to stop or at least cut the trance and make it as short as possible? I would say emphasize prevention rather than this, but you do need some practical techniques. All of these are probably going to work, but not all of these are going to work for all of you. So try it out, see what actually helps you stop the trance, and then continue using that. You only need one efficient technique. You don't need 75. So just focus on something that works and then make sure you do it. I suggest, because when you're in that state, it's really difficult to even remember that you need to use a technique. Not that anyone can blame you, of course. So what I suggest is that you use a Post-it note in some hideous color, like a color that you absolutely hate, and preferably a very saturated Post-it note so that it's just jumps at you so that you can't not see it. Write down the technique that you want to use on that Post-it and stick it in those places where you tend to have these trance-like episodes, because you need a reminder that you're supposed to use a technique. We have a whole worksheet with breathing exercises you can download from the VIP section. So you can have some, there are actually 2 PDFs. There's one that contains several and one that contains oceanic breathing. I believe there's also a blog post that describes some breathing exercises. You can find them, just Google breathing exercises. I can make a whole webinar teaching you how to do these if you want. You can use the RAIN technique. So recognize, accept, investigate, nurture, or non-identify. We also have a blog post about this, explaining, there are actually 2 blog posts. There's one on the 4 Steps Coaching website, and there's one in the BFRB club. The one in the BFRB club contains a practical example, and it walks you through all the steps specifically for BFRBs. There's also, I believe, a guided file that you can download from the VIP section as well if you're there. There are recordings out there. There's a whole book dealing with RAIN. It's called Radical Compassion by Tara Brach. She didn't invent the technique, but she's among its most popular proponents. You can use the SSE technique, Soothe, Soften, Allow. You can learn this for free on Christine Neff's website. It's selfcompassion.org. There's actually a guided meditation for this, so you can play it a couple of times and then learn how to use it step by step. Both of these are really very useful, really, really useful. but you do have to memorize the steps, and they require quite a bit of practice. For breathing techniques, count that they're not going to work the first time you use them. You need to use them continuously for about 5 minutes. Compassionate self-talk. We have a free course on self-compassion. It's a 3-week course. So you can, if you join the BFRB club, if you join in the free tier as well, you can have the whole course. If you want to get personalized feedback, that's available only to the VIP lounge members. But otherwise, all the course materials are there for free for everyone to take. You have 3 lectures, you have all the guided meditations you need, and additional resources. So I've made sure to give you all the tools that you need. Focusing on the body and using grounding techniques that focus on the body. So that's very useful. We also have a blog post and a PDF with grounding techniques that you can download. Cold showers really tend to help. So trances are really intense. So a cold shower is going to snap you out of it because it is really intense. If you have someone that you live with, make a deal that if you go to the bathroom, that you leave the door open, or that your partner is going to knock on the door after 5 minutes, for example, or whatever you need. I mean, set the time based on whatever it is you do in the bathroom or wherever trance states occur, or call them out. Call them, tell them to just drag you out of there if they have to. But having someone or call someone, it doesn't even have to be your partner or husband or boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. It can be a friend, a neighbor, someone that you've met online, anyone that would be there for you in that moment. Just call them and have them talk you out of it. Because this state contains so much hyperfocus, it's very useful to have an external agent to pull you out of it, because you might not have the willpower to do it yourself, which is why I emphasize prevention rather than this. But you need to have these as well. When the fish is there, you have to catch it somehow. And then these two, the last two are also rather simple. One is to exaggerate or act out what you actually want to do or what you feel. Yell, roll around on the floor, dance, hit something. I mean, don't break anything, don't hit anyone, get a pillow, hit it. That's what I meant. So if you have those, like if you use silly putty or even those squeeze, like stress balls and those toys that you can squeeze, there are some that are made of foam that you can just rip apart. This is a way to channel that energy out without sinking into a trance-like state. Exercise could also work, except that usually when you're on the edge of a trance, you don't have time to go to the gym, right? So something like this can help. Screaming is surprisingly efficient. And then one other thing that you can do is just focus on the pain. Because this is available to you in the moment. It's connected to your body and to your senses. And if you focus on the pain that you feel, you're more likely to stop doing it. So in a sense, by focusing on the painful aspect of the picking trance, you're actually allowing yourself to snap out of it. Because when the sensations of pain come to the forefront of your attention, you're more likely to stop doing it than if the focus is on the pleasurable side of it. So even though it seems like a ridiculous thing to tell someone focus on the pain, this actually helps you snap out of it. Or if you're pulling your hair, focusing on the pain and on the number of hairs that you've pulled. If you see blood, focus on the blood, for example, when you pick. So anything that will produce that, oh, this is gross, or I'm harming myself effect, and then it'll snap you out of it. So these were just some very basic in the moment techniques. But prevention, as I said, is what I think is the only viable method of getting rid of trances. First things first, you have to learn from them, right? Prevention strategies focus on anticipation of trances and the implementation of techniques to alleviate those that you can prevent, which is why I said you have to get to know your trances first. You have to know what triggers them, where they occur. So That way you can plan ahead. If they happen, I don't know, in the bed before you go to sleep, that means that maybe you need to structure your evening routine. If you don't have one, then create one. It also means that maybe you should not be spending any time in your bedroom except when you go to sleep. So bed is only for sleeping, period. It's like one of the elements of sleep hygiene. If you do it in the bathroom, then make sure that the lights are off, wear gloves when you're in the bathroom, set a timer there. There are many things that you can do. These are called stimulus control techniques. Whereas for those like less intense speaking episodes, I would always favor competing responses, so replacement habits, from the behavioral spectrum of techniques anyway, because they give you more agency. Here, stimulus control really is the best way to go, because you have to control what triggers you, because once you're triggered, it's really difficult to snap out of it. You can take one more step back and then address the causes that you figure out through self-observation and learning about yourself and your picking and pulling, which is that the antidote to experiential avoidance is to open up to the difficult experiences. So learning how to be with your emotions, but not lose your equanimity, learning how to process your emotions, learning how to self-soothe in healthy ways. These are all very long processes, skills that require practice, but these are really the most reliable ways to prevent these intense trance-like episodes. So stimulus control, I already mentioned. Intentional mindful approach is another thing, which means that if you're going to brush your teeth, then you walk into the bathroom slowly, feeling your feelings, making sure to be as mindful as you can, and then turning teeth brushing into a mindfulness exercise, because you're learning how to be with your sensations without reacting to them. And informal mindfulness is kind of less intensely confronting. And also, when you do things slowly, step by step, with intention, then you have more conscious control over what you're doing. So you're less likely to slip into a trance state. Because a trance state involves you letting go, or kind of surrendering yourself to automatic behaviors at some point. Mindfulness is the exact opposite of that. Remembering to ask yourself, what do I need right now throughout the day or before entering a triggering situation, and then taking care of yourself first. And then also some self-compassion movements. I teach these in my mindfulness courses, and I believe I've written some blogs about them a while ago, although I'm not quite sure. If not, use the suggestion box in the club and I will produce a blog for you. So these are certain movements or gestures that you can do that have a soothing effect on your body. One very obvious one is to put your right hand over your heart and your left hand on your abdomen, and then to focus on the warmth. This is, if you do this in a triggering situation, even before a trance state begins, it's very likely to make the urge less intense or just do away with it altogether. These are really very simple movements usually, and they're rather easy to perform. So there's really no rational excuse as to why you wouldn't do them. In fact, they're so simple that you can use them as competing responses. Putting your hand on your chest is not exactly socially inappropriate, so you can do that anytime, anywhere. So that's everything I had for you today. Hopefully this wasn't too long, but since I'm feeling a little tired, it probably was too long. My apologies, and I will see you for the webinar next month. Take a few moments to send some suggestions if there are some topics you'd like to hear about, and I will make sure to listen to what you have to say. So for now, goodbye, and see you next month.